A big thank you to all of you who like, comment, subscribe and share my videos, or through other means support this channel. You are what makes this channel grow and become a resource for other people to learn from. Enough about how awesome you are, back to the video. Welcome back. So we have now reached the point where we have sort of a card hand available to us. If we press play and add some cards. So we have this hand of cards now, and now we want to do something with it. So one of the things that makes sense and is available in most card games is the ability to actually observe or inspect your card. You hover over it or do something and you get that card singled out so you can read what kind of effect it has. Some card games do that just by hovering. Other card games do it by having to drag the card out from your hand. We'll do the approach of just hovering in this case. But let's start creating that functionality. So starting off, we will go into our card widget. The reason why we start here is because using the card widget, we can go to its functions and we can find among the override functions here some built-in functionality that we have just from the basis of it being a widget. In this case, we want to go to the on mouse enter. So this is going to create an event for us that we can hook on some code to when the mouse will move over this specific card. What we want to do is place the card in such a way and also other cards in our hand so that we can see the card properly so we can read it. To do this, we are in the need of communicating with our card hand, because the card hand is who dictates where the cards should be, and then it tells the cards you should be there, 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 there. To do this, we will create an event dispatcher. So anyone who's interested in this, we can just say that, well, this is happening now. So we create an event dispatcher called onHovered. And as an input to this, we will send in a widget of the card variety that we've created. And we'll just name it card hovered. This means that we can now call on this event here, and we can say that the card hovered is going to be us, so we get a reference to self. Now anyone who's listening to this will know that anytime we are hovered, they can do whatever they feel like is interesting at that point. So if we go to our card hand and open up that widget, go to our graph and we go to our event graph, we can, when we add a card to our hand, we can decide, okay, well, this is a good time. We have had a card added to our hand. Now might be a good time to sign up that we want to listen to if something is getting hovered. So we have this widget here. We can drag off from it and say we want to bind to onHovered. So the onHovered event we are now listening to after having added it to our hand. From here, we can just drag off the event now and say we want to add an event, and it will give us the signature of this specific event dispatcher. In this case, we can say that we want to, or we can type card hovered as the name of the event itself. And now is when we need to decide how are we supposed to be reacting with this. So what we can do is, first of all, keep track of that we actually have this specific card hovered. That makes it easier for logic later on. So we'll get our card widgets reference. So this is our array of widgets, and from here we can just say we want to find the specific item that we're getting notified about here, that this is being hovered. And then we'll save this information as a variable. So we can call this hovered card index. Now that we have saved the card index, we can then say, well, let's update our card positions. And the reason for this is now we can then code in our update card positions to take into consideration this, if it should take into consideration that at any point. So going to our update card positions, if you remember, we have our calculate card position where we decide where should each card be. So going into that, we have this translation that we're creating of X and Y position. Both of these are calculated and sent out for us to have a card in. So if we want to have sort of a card that we're inspecting, we might want to move it up a little bit in Y position so that it's a little bit clearer, but we might also want to do it so that all the other cards that are to the right of this hovered card, for example, we scooch it a little bit further to the right so we give some space to read the text on the card. So there's two different things we could do here to actually allow this hover effect to have a readability positive effect. If we go to our Y position, we can start over here to begin with. So currently we're having a position calculated here already that we're using as our Y position, but we could always add multiple of these things. So we could add another offset here and have that one jacked into here and have this actual result go into the output instead. To make it clean like we have done here before, we can just create another method for this. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we can call this one get hovered card Y displacement. So this one will give us a value in where we can see how much we should move this card in the Y axis. And we'll make this pure just because it will make it a little bit cleaner later on. We'll create a return node, and from here what we want to do is we want to first establish, do we have a hovered card or not at all? So in the case of when you're searching for an array, if an array doesn't have an element in it, it will return a yield of -1 as the index. So having a default value on our hovered card index here to be -1, that's not the minus we want, will allow us to have this as the default value, saying that we don't have a hovered card. And then whenever we have hovered a card, we set the index, and then when we stop hovering a card, we can put this back again so we know that it's not being used. This allows us to now get this value and compare it and see, is it greater than 0? But greater than 0 is not good enough because the first index is 0. So we'll actually get the greater equal then and have that as our driving factor here. And this will decide if we have a card hovered or not. From this we'll create a branch. Holding down B, you can drag it up like so. And we could now hook up this to be two output nodes like so, and then have them return the value that we want to displace with. So we want to displace with an output that is of the type float, and we can call this card displacement. All right. So in this function, we can create a local variable so that it only exists here. We can call it local card displacement. Make it of the type float and hook that up to our true position. So when we have a hovered card, then we'll have a local displacement of whatever that it is calculated. Otherwise, we don't have one at all. Now, this works fine if we calculate the displacement over here, but we might want to have this as an exposed variable that we later on can change and manipulate with some parameters. So for that purpose, we'll actually remove this local variable and instead create a normal variable. So we'll call this one card Y displacement. Using this variable instead, we now have it exposed outside of the variable, which is clunkier in the sense of keeping it compartmentalized, but it allows us to access this from outside. Now, When it comes to the value itself, we could have a default value here just so we have something. So let's say a minus 100. Minus because the minus in a y-axis on the widget scale will allow it to go up, which is what we want. So now we can determine that if we have a hovered card, move it 100 units up. Okay. If we go back, we can now hook up our get hovered card y displacement, put it in there, compile, and now if we, let's see here, did I actually do all the parts? We have an event, we do the update has this. Yeah, let's see what happens here. I think I have everything. So we'll create a few cards, and if we hover over one of them, we can see all of them are being hovered. And the reason for this is that if we go to the card position and get Y position and hovered card Y displacement, we can see that we're just checking if any card is hovered, then this should be placed. So it doesn't really matter that it matches the card that we currently have selected, which is a problem, of course. So what we'll do is we'll add that as a condition as well. We have an ability to add an input here, saying we want to have a card index as an input, because that is what we generally are working with. And then we can say get card index. With the card index now, we want to compare this and make sure that it is equal to the hovered card index to make sure that we are actually on the card that we're making use of here. Now, you could reason that instead of using this comparator, we could just do this one by itself and say, well, if the card index is equal to the hovered card index is the same, then we want to have the displacement, otherwise we don't want to have it. So if we were to check it now, we can see having 3 cards here, hovering over one of the cards actually doesn't do anything. And the reason for this is obviously that we have added our card index now, but we don't have it added get card Y position. We don't have it as an input here. So we add it to our get card Y position, and this should be fine. There we go, and we hover over it and it goes up. Now you can see that we can only get one card at a time because we're only hovering it like so. So that's working as intended, but the hovering doesn't actually go back by itself. So let's add that functionality. So equally like we have a mouse on enter, we also have another function we can override, which is the mouse on mouse leave. And for this we'll create something similar. So we'll create another event dispatcher, and we'll send another input parameter on it that is going to be of the type, it's already card here for me, so I want to change that. So I'll just say card unhovered, and we'll rename it to card unhovered as well. So we'll call this event dispatcher, and we'll use self again here when we're leaving with the mouse. Going back to our card hand, we now need to go to our event graph again and say we need to bind that event as well if we want to listen to it. So we'll bind to unhovered. There we go. Okay, so now we are bound to unhovered. We'll give ourselves a little bit of space here and drag this down here, add an event, and we'll just say card unhovered. There we go. So this will be our event now that decides that, okay, we're no longer hovering the card. And from the logic that we have done so far, we didn't have a whole lot of logic to it. What we did was essentially we set the hovered card index here earlier, and just setting this variable now to be -1, resetting it back, would mean that we don't have a card hovered anymore. However, there is a possibility here where we could have, let's see if we can demonstrate it. If we play around and we have a few cards and we drag from this card over to this card, we can't be 100% sure that they will always come in the same order, that the leave from this comes before the enter of this comes. It should do so in most cases, but just to be a little bit on the defensive coding side, we can take that into consideration here, and we can do the following. We can check if our card widget array has the index from the card unhovered that we're getting here. If those are the same as the currently hovered card index that we have stored. Not sure why my mouse wants to do that. So we're checking now if the notification we're getting is the same as the card we currently have stored as being hovered. We'll give ourselves a space and a branch here. Then we can say, okay, so the card we had hovered is no longer hovered. So that means we can set this to -1. If this does not happen, this means that the new card updated our hovered card index first, then the card we had previously hovered gets to send its message, and it will no longer match here, and we will no longer set this index. And we don't need to set it to anything else because the event over here, card hovered, has already run, and so we have set the card hovered card index there. So we can leave our false branch unchanged here or without code. And then after setting this, we'll just update our card position again. And everything should be returning to normal after we have left the card. So let's try that out. So we hover over a card, we leave it, and you can see that we now have this. And also we could do this similar before. If we moved that over another card, it would move up. But now we can also just leave and it will return to place, which it did not do before. Alright, so now we have the card peaking in place, sort of. Now that we have the movement upwards for the card, let's also make sure that we have the ability to move cards to the right of the hovered card to the right, so we have some space to read the card itself. So we'll go to our card hand, and we have the situation where we update our card positions, of course, and inside that we calculate our card position. So we want to change how our card X position is now handled by adding another pin that is added on top of this offset and the center positioning. So we'll just click on plus here to get another pin here. We'll add the function. We can call this one get X get hovered. To be consistent, hovered X displacement. Now we're consistent with the naming from the other one. Actually, I did call the other one card as well, so hovered card X displacement. We'll make this one a pure function as well. And equally to what we have done in the previous one, we want to add an input that's going to be, let's see here, of an integer, that is the card index. We want to have an output that's going to be of the type float, which is going to be our card X displacement. Again, we will create a variable outside of the local space, which we call card X displacement. For the same reason as we created the Y displacement, we want to have an ability to alter how much cards should be moved around from this. Now we can do something very similar to before. We can do the same thing where we went and said, well, if our hovered card index is above a certain value, we could then determine that, okay, it's being hovered or not. And then we reasoned in the other one, in the card Y displacement in, let's see here, we didn't actually clean this up, that this was not really necessary for us. But when it comes to the case for the card X displacement, comparing this that it is greater or equal than 0 is important, because if we were to have a value of the default value of -1, then it would think that all of these should be displaced, which means that they're all getting shuffled around. So that's not something we want to do. So instead we want to check against this and a different case, which is the same one we had before, which is our card index equal to something? But in this case, we don't want to check against equal. We want to check if this card that we're currently trying to calculate a position for is to the right of the hovered card, meaning greater than this card index, because then we want to move the card to the right. So we're giving it some space. So we get the hovered card index here as well, like so. Then we add our branch. And then we hook this up. And then we can say that on the true event, we get the card X displacement. Otherwise, we will just return 0, so it will not move it any differently. And when it comes to the displacement itself, we can just set a default value here of something. Let's start with 250. That should make it pretty clear that if it's working or not. Going back, here we go. So now we're in the card X position, get card X position part again. So we want to call on our function. We want to send in our card index. We want to hook it up. And now if we play, we should hopefully get so that it's just being erased if we're on the right side, but if we are go on this card, you can see that we're giving ourselves some space by moving the cards that are to the right of that card. So that's exactly what we wanted to achieve. So very good. So let's take a moment to recap what we've done in this episode. So in this episode, we have gone to our card, we've created some or hooked on to some existing functions, events that exist, which is the mouse enter and the mouse leave, which we call some event dispatchers from, essentially sending information to whoever listens that we are that the mouse is over or leaving the card at any point. This allows us to then listen to this information in our card hand, where we have information about these cards being hovered or not hovered, and we store that index, and then we say we want to update the position. Using that index position of what card we have hovered, we then set a different value for our Y position by displacing it slightly if it is the hovered card that we're currently recalculating the position for. Or in the case of the X displacement, we're checking if this is a card to the right of the hovered card, then move it a little bit aside so that we can actually see the card and read what's on the text. With those parts in play, we are now going to be ending this episode. So keep on learning. Take care. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.